Hey, let's you and me, let's talk about one of the big problems with VR in general. Because, I love VR, you love VR, probably, but there's one big issue with VR that I think still really hasn't been overcome globally, and that's the fact that there still are not that many games for it, quite frankly, because, I would have said that when I first got into VR 2 years ago, and I would have been pretty right. There was really only a couple really standout titles within the VR space that were like mind-blowingly high quality that really made you feel like it was worth investing into the hardware. And if I made that same argument now, which I am, I would still be only marginally less wrong, unfortunately, because, quite frankly, it seems that it's very, very expensive and very, very difficult to create VR games. And even when smaller studios are able to crank out good VR games, they don't play generally to the strengths of VR, because for better or worse, one of the primary strengths of VR is exploiting tremendously large production houses' ability to throw ludicrous amounts of money at a project, because VR rewards visual fidelity 10 times more than standard gaming ever did. Because when things look good in VR, you are able to just completely lose yourselves in those environments. Still playing Alyx today, probably the most visually impressive VR game to date, it still is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's not just the visuals that make Alyx a singular VR title. And I'm gonna talk about that at some point, but not today. My point being is that you need that AAA budget to make the best use of VR. I don't like that. You don't like it. It's just the truth, though. So, where does that leave us? Because generally we've seen that AAA companies are not willing to throw their money into these projects that have relatively niche audiences, unless, like Valve or like Facebook, or Meta now, I suppose, they have a vested interest in getting those platforms to succeed, right? But, of course, and this is a big old batootie, there is a tremendous amount of games which would fit wonderfully into VR, which already exist. And it's kind of amazing to me, given the AAA market's propensity for remaking games, that they haven't remade more titles in VR, because that would get me to buy a lot of games. If you remade Fallout New Vegas in VR, hell, if you even remade some of the other, like Fallout 3 or 4 again, if you fixed Fallout 4 in VR without me having to mod the hell out of it, I would pick that back up. Hell, I would pay for Fallout 4 again if they made a good Fallout 4 VR. And immersive sims? Like, how is there not a port of an immersive sim to VR? Give me, like, Prey in VR. Good lord, I would pay out the nose for Prey in VR. But that's really neither here nor there, because we're not getting this. The thing is, Vorpix has been for a long time the only way of playing those traditional games inside of the VR space. I'm not going to get footage of Vorpix for this video, so you're not going to see it, because I don't want to see it, because it's not good. It's not good, and it's not comfortable, and I don't like doing it. And I'm not going to go through the laborious task of setting Vorpix up again. That's just how it is. I would not recommend Vorpix personally. I think it just does not work very well, because traditional control schemes just don't work well when you need to change the aiming reticle to your head. It's not a good idea, and you shouldn't do it. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us, of course, with a tremendous backlog of games that so many of us would love to be in VR, but aren't. However, there are some people who are doing something about that, and God bless them, because their work thus far has been spectacular. And I'll leave a link to the Discord where a lot of this work is going on in the flat screen to VR Discord. And there is a tremendous number of titles, I should say tremendous, I mean like 8 or 12, that are being worked on right now that have full VR support. Because that's the other thing about Warpix, is that you don't get full VR support. And quite frankly, unless I have motion controllers, it's not real VR. Okay, that's just true. So let's talk about some of the good and some of the bad aspects of what these ports are doing so far, how they can improve, and if you should really look at them in the current state that they're at right now, because I don't think any of these projects are advertising themselves as fully complete yet. That is fine, right? And we can look at these projects with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? Because we know that they are still in development and there are probably things that will change, but we maybe can help that, right? So let's look at it. And let's look at two in particular today, Resident Evil 2 and Half-Life. Now, the Resident Evil 2 VR mod is rather good, I would say, on the whole. It does have some drawbacks that I don't think the mod is ever really going to be able to completely fix. So let's talk about what those are. And it's pretty easy to see within the first couple minutes of booting up the game, and that is that cutscenes, when viewed from a virtual reality headset, are not very comfortable to look at. And just as importantly, they break a lot, because as it turns out, when you could look around as you please during a cutscene, it turns out that they cut a lot of corners to make these things work, which is not surprising to me, having played games as long as I have. Corners are cut everywhere all the time, we just rarely get to see it. Now we do, though, and that's not great. And I think it's really indicative of how much of a problem this can turn out to be when, during the end of the sort of introduction sequence, when you have to flee the gas station, the game puts vignettes on, and it doesn't put vignettes on anywhere else if you've turned them off, which I have. But it's very reasonable that it turns vignettes on there, because the camera just cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. It would be incredibly nauseating, even to someone who is incredibly acclimated to VR, to see this cutscene play out as it was originally designed. It's just not good for you. But I think that is a lot of the bad, outside of performance issues, which hopefully will get resolved over time, and if not, then increasing hardware over time will also just solve that problem somewhat naturally. I did upgrade my computer for this finally. I haven't been able to upgrade my GPU yet, but a lot of the performance issues I've been having with VR have been smoothed out, but even here, there are definitely some issues still going on, and I'm not really getting performance problems anywhere else, but in the Resident Evil 2 VR mod, yeah, I'm getting some slowdowns and stutters, which is maybe not incredibly surprising, but overall, I think that it's in a pretty good state performance-wise. I think the biggest issue is how much the game isn't even designed for first person, let alone VR. Because I think that VR conversions are generally going to work best for games designed for first person that don't have you constantly being pulled out to that third person perspective, which Resident Evil 2, the VR version, does by necessity, essentially. And when we do, we get to look at Leon looking like this. Isn't this beautiful, ladies and gentlemen? Leon S. Kennedy, for your consideration. Anyhow, back on point. So yeah, anytime you enter the menu, anytime you interact with the environment, you get pulled out of your body. You get a little good old out-of-body experience there, and it's not the worst thing ever, but it does kind of ruin the point of playing VR in the first place, because much of the point of playing VR is to get completely immersed within the setting, to lose yourself in those environments. And when you are literally being pulled out of that perspective almost constantly, because you're almost constantly interacting with menus or looking at the map or something in Resident Evil 2, it's very distracting, and I never quite felt completely sold on where I was like I am in games designed for VR, or even like we're going to talk about later in the Half-Life mod. It just doesn't work all that well to what VR is intended to do. However, on the other hand, it is absolutely gorgeous. So that's kind of a bit of the trade-off there, right? If anything, VR really highlights how good Resident Evil 2 looks, because my god are the textures amazing. Now, you do have to install a couple mods to also get this to work right. The HD texture mod and smooth movement are basically a must. Smooth movement is absolutely 110% something you must install if you're going to play this, because otherwise you're going to be jittering around in a game that can already have some frame rate issues, and it even gave me a headache, and I very rarely get headaches in VR, but it is not good to look at, especially if you don't have the smooth movement on. So yeah, absolutely get that. But yeah, the installation is smooth. The gameplay is generally pretty good. The only thing that I think I really miss in terms of the actual interaction, of course, is the manual reloading, which I've gotten very used to as a person who plays VR really frequently, and it feels very awkward and unpleasant to just press a button and see someone's hand reload in front of me. I really don't like that, but I don't think that's a problem that they're going to be able to solve. So we'll put that over in the negative category. But generally, I think if you want to play Resident Evil 2 in VR, that's kind of not a spectacular idea from a conceptual standpoint, because like I said, it's just not a game that's built to be played even in first person. But it is kind of fun and kind of neat. So it really feels mixed to me overall. And absolutely some of the scares really did get me in this perspective. And it's really fun and interesting to manage the tension that you have from the new perspective. But the constantly being pulled out of that perspective really kind of lessened how much I think I should have been feeling that, or do feel that, in better, or even, I won't even say better VR horror games, just more designed for purpose VR horror games. So, Now, I am really excited for the Resident Evil 7 and 8 VR ports that are still being worked on at the moment, but however, they are far less feature complete than Resident Evil 2 and 3. Resident Evil 2 and 3 are, essentially completely playable from the VR perspective, whereas Resident Evil 7 and 8 are still lacking a lot of features, which is why I'm not covering them today. I'll be very excited to talk about Resident Evil 7 and 8 in VR when those mods are more done. So, I think that's it for all I really have to say about Resident Evil 2. Let's talk a little bit about the Half-Life mod, because the Half-Life mod, I think, overall fits what VR is designed to do much, much better. Because Half-Life is a game which is already designed to basically never pull you out of the first-person perspective that you start in. It's also designed to be very interesting visually from the first-person perspective, to have a lot of things for you to kind of look at and gawk at, and to just be an engaging game to be played because you're playing it from a first-person perspective. And that completely, 100% translates to working extremely well in VR. The only kind of weird moments I've had playing this is that I realized that I have confused completely my memories of playing the Black Mesa mod with my memories of playing vanilla Half-Life, because 80% of the game I think of as being the Black Mesa mod at this point, for whatever reason. Anyways, as a tangent, don't worry about that. But yeah, the fact that it's designed to work from first person just makes it work so much better. And also, I'll say that naturally, given that it's running Half-Life, a game from 1999, there are no performance problems. Hey! The downside, of course, is that you're playing a game from 1999, and it does not look particularly good. The high-definition textures here that people have often complained about in Half-Life definitely are necessary to not be looking at a horrible blocky nightmare world. So yeah, I would recommend that. But I think really that my point with this is that despite the lower fidelity visuals and dated graphics, I felt a lot more immersed playing Half-Life than I did Resident Evil 2 because I was never taken out of that perspective aside for loading screens. And, when I was pushing the cart and doing the experiment things and doing the Half-Life stuff, I was way more freaked out, I was way more engaged with what was going on because it's a game that is designed almost perfectly for VR. Go figure. Really, when you stop and think about it, Valve has already made Half-Life 1 and 2 essentially in the same way you would make a VR game now. You never really leave that first-person perspective, and control is very rarely, if ever, actually taken away from the player. This makes both of them perfect candidates to just port straight into VR. All you really need to do is adapt the controls. And like I was saying, the installer for the Half-Life VR mod also is a lot cleaner. At least, so I was playing it's just called, I think, Half-Life VR is what the PC version is called. There's also a version for Quest 2 that you can sideload and completely play in solo mode. So that's great if you're playing on a Quest 2 instead, which I imagine most of you are. So yeah, it's really great whether you're playing in PC VR or Quest 2. And like I said, the PC VR is just seamless. You just press the installer, you press launch game, and you have to find a controller setup, which I'm not sure that I've really found one that I actually really like all that much, but whatever. And you're just going. You're just going. It's easy peasy. I will say, however, and also especially the PC VR mod, it has actual good VR interfaces as well. Like you can see your health on your hands. It feels a lot more kind of like a game designed for VR from the ground up. It works surprisingly well for an independent project translating Half-Life to VR. It's actually very good, and I think I have a lot better to say about Half-Life VR than I do about Resident Evil 2 in VR. Now, I will say that the gun effects and feedback from attacks doesn't work particularly well. It's fun to swing around the crowbar, don't get me wrong. Swinging that big old thing around like a big old baseball bat and hitting head crabs like you're slamming grand slams in sports ball is real fun. But the firearms seem to really lack impact. And I think that kind of speaks to how much work goes into making firearms feel good in VR. There's no kickback and even the muzzle flash is basically non-existent as far as I can tell. So it's kind of almost like you don't feel like you're shooting a gun when you fire the guns. It's really weird. And of course, you can only handle the guns with one hand and a lot of things like that come with the fact that this is a small team working on a VR mod, not a big budget project. And that's fine, and maybe that'll get added eventually. I think, honestly, that makes the game feel a lot more real to me when you can actually use your hands in the ways that you can use your hands in reality. That's a really big selling point. I really do like that you have fully articulated hands in this, though. That's actually kind of a big deal for me. I think that's really big for the immersion in general. But yeah, overall, I would say that the Half-Life mod is very worth trying out if you want to give that a shot. That comes with basically no caveats. It's just great to be able to experience Half-Life in VR, because it does feel essentially almost just like it was made that way, with some of the caveats that I mentioned aside. So yeah, I think that the Half-Life VR is much better overall. And so that's it. That's all I really have to talk about. There's just those two for now. As I play some more of these and maybe test them out, I'll talk a little bit more about them. Firewatch, the Firewatch one in VR actually looks pretty interesting to me, because that's a really visually interesting game. It's kind of mostly just walking around and looking at things, so I think that would fit very well into VR. I'm kind of interested to see how that works out. I want to try Resident Evil 3 in VR, see if that works any better or worse. I would expect that it's probably still going to be not so great. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about right now. We're not.